what does effective maths journaling look like in practice? So you've already said it's not a bolt on, which I'm 100% behind. We do things and they're part of our very being as teachers. Because when we start tacking on metacognition and things together, they don't really get done unless someone's observing us. What's your approach? And obviously, what we'll try and do is we'll try and have some pictures, I think, on like LinkedIn underneath the
Yeah,
episode, so we can see at the same time as people are listening.
yeah,
absolutely. So I think we started with a conceptual framework, if you like. So we took a specific mathematical chunk, if you like. So if we're looking at addition or looking at subtraction, we would bear that to the start. We would start very often with a brain dump, which we would model and scaffold very clearly with the children to start with. So that would include what key vocabulary they would know. Could they give us a worked example? Have they any top tips? So if they were teaching that, what would they want to say to somebody about that particular concept? Is there a real life context? So how would they apply that in the big bad world out there? Could they think of a way that would be applicable? So we've sort of modelled and scaffolded that quite carefully to start with, but then we've been really impressed by the sophistication and the fastness, for want of a better, the quality of it increases really quickly over time in terms of what the children are producing. So that's how we would sort of start. I think we've both taken that conceptual framework, if you like, and then thought, well, what do we need the children to know? What are the key parts? What are the key concepts, the key strategies, the key procedures, the key vocabulary that we'd like our children to know about addition or fractions or whatever it is that you're teaching? And those have given us moments for journaling. So there might be stop and jot bits within our learning where we're like, this is something that we want you to know. Can you record that? But we've been very much the case that's not, it doesn't need to be written. It can be pictures, it can be doodles. We've had some great cartoons thrown in there as well. Whatever makes sense to the children as learners, as long as they are retaining and able to retrieve that key information. Within that as well, we would probably have lots of practice because children absolutely do need practice. We are not averse to worksheets. We are not averse to textbooks at all. There will be a more sort of procedural or clarity of our layout in terms of what we're teaching, and that would be our direct instruction. Towards the end of that cycle, we would want to have a post-assessment or assessment as well. So that would really kind of think about real-world context. So there we might play about a little bit. So we might get them to design a Halloween party. We might get them to do some travel. So they're bringing in those budgetary skills, those monetary skills, but they're also seeing how to apply those strategies within a wider context that makes it real and it makes them meaningful for them. So it's about learning with a purpose towards the end of that, because we're quite keen that it has to make sense to them. We're still very little in primary school, so we need to make sure we've got that creativity, that play, that engagement, and that joy in their learning within it as well.
absolutely.
I
I think within that initial phase where they're brain dumping, though, that allows us that pre-assessment of their learning. That's their retrieval practice time where they're thinking back to previous years of learning or when we've revisited it earlier in our own school year. But we can pick up on misconceptions and we can adapt our teaching. Our teaching is responsive to the children we have in front of us for that year. So we need to be looking at what do we need to cover for them? Where are the gaps in their understanding, and adapting what our direct instruction is in order to try and close some of that. I think also of key importance in our classrooms are the real sense of talk, as we were talking about, but we use STEM sentences and sentence stems to scaffold their discussions with one another, but also within their journal entries themselves. So that they're using vocabulary in the correct context, they've got the meaning of those words, it's sense making really for them, and it's that real sense of disciplinary literacy. There's a particular way to talk about maths, there's a particular way to write about maths, there are diagrams, there's equations, there's symbols, and all of that needs to make sense to the child, because that can be a real unknown. We have an EAL learner who we reference frequently because he talked about it being a secret language, and that actually through journaling he's now able to understand the secret language of maths. And it is something we don't necessarily see when we do see maths all around us, but the way we talk about it and the language we're using is quite unique to the subject. So we need to make sure we're explicitly teaching that.
But I think as well it's that consistency of language and making sure that you use the correct terminology right from when they're very small, so that they're not, there's been instances when I've seen workbooks talking about sorting diagrams, and then later on it would be a Venn diagram. Why not just call it a Venn diagram from the very start? Because that's kind of helps with misconceptions, or helps children not understand and be confused and be puzzled about it. So I think we're quite kind of key advocates of making sure that we're using the correct discipline and literacy from the very start. So in our eyes, that would be from nursery onwards.
Absolutely. And I think for us, it's that sense of, we want to have high expectations of our children, but that's not about making the work hard for them. When we're talking about high expectations, we're talking about what they're capable of. And children, very young children, can grasp very complex vocabulary in the right context when it has meaning for them, and when they can attribute the correct symbol or representation to that. The example we talked about is that, the 4 and 5 year olds that can reel off dinosaur names, and that because they know exactly which one to identify because they've made those connections, that we need to do the same within our teaching. We need to assume that they are capable of being able to learn and use the correct terminology from a very, very young age, and not, dilute it or even sort of misterm things so that they then have to unlearn it and relearn it again later, and realign their thinking. Start from when they're young and follow that through, and have that consistency throughout your the primary school education, nursery and primary school, and you'll feel that their own talk is much more elaborate. They're able to question one another much more skillfully by the time they're that little bit older, because it has been modeled. You're using the correct language, you're sharing that with them, and you're celebrating that in the classroom. You're encouraging them in their talk and celebrating each other and picking out examples when you hear it, and they have that sort of community learning within the room as well.
I think what's really clear as well is the visibility of the children's thinking, and there's a real sort of evidence of the progress that they're making. So, and that's not only just visible to them, it's if they're sharing their work with their peers, they're able to see it. A really nice example is that kind of initial brain dump, and if you compare it, if you did another brain dump at the end, or you did the assessment at the end, just so the children can actually look and see, well, gosh, look how much you've learned, look how much you can talk about addition now that you couldn't at the very beginning. And that's real kind of confidence booster. It shows them that they can do it. It ties into all that work on growth mindset. It was hard, but I struggled, but now I can see it. So not only does that give the children a boost as learners, but even as a practitioner, it gives you a nice boost as well, because you're able to say, oh, look, I have actually taught you something. I'm quite kind of successful in what I'm pushing forward here. So I think that's a really a nice thing about journaling as well. It sort of ties in that visibility of your thinking, but it's also done it in a really kind of creative way as well. And as Holly says, that inclusivity is so important to what we're promoting as well.
And I think ultimately for us, it's that ownership, that their jotters are unique to them. Yes, there are practice pages, as we're saying, with setting out procedures and with work marked correctly or incorrectly, but within that is that real ownership of their own journey. And we know that we all work better when we feel we have control over something, and it feels that it's within, we have ownership of it, and that agency really comes through, that their jotters are personal, that they don't look exactly the same, and that they're able to make sense and make meaning for themselves. So it's the real sort of story of their thinking within that jotter space. We've often asked if they have 2 separate jotters or how that all works, but it's keeping it all together, because they need to see that the talking and the writing is completely linked in with their learning about maths. It is all part of that whole process. And so we keep it all together so that they have that story in one place together.